Hello Titan Dev Team, this one is for the character artists. We've been getting a lot of questions about how to go about properly importing and setting up characters, so I figured that it would be a good opportunity to run through it, as this can be quite complicated, especially for people who have never done it before. Now, we have provided a base character asset, one which you can export out of the engine. It's very easy to do. All you need to do is right click, asset actions, and export. Now that unfortunately is where the easy part ends. Generally working with bone orientation can be an absolute pain in the butt. So in order to try and make that a little bit easier for everyone, as we're getting a lot of people struggling with this, which is again very justified, I have gone in and I have created a couple of base Blender files that have imported in the character for you correctly. Now, if you want to do this yourself, it does require a little bit of setup. The main thing is that you need to go in and set your unit scale to 0.01 on your settings, and then in your import settings, when we go in, I have created a preset here, and I'm just going to expose all of these assets out so that you can see them all. So basically the main thing is we need to just force a manual orientation, set Y forward Z up on that, and then primary bone axis is X and secondary bone axis is Z. So if you copy these import settings, then your bone orientation will be correct when you import in your asset. Now it's going to look a little bit weird. We've used the same bone orientation setup as the mannequin character to try and keep things as nice and cohesive as possible. But this should get your character imported in and set up. You can then go in and export this character using another preset option which I have made, UE-Scale 2, and again I'll just expose those for you so that you can see those as well. So we make sure that we use armature, mesh and other selected objects only, just in case we have multiple elements in our scene. We use Y forward Z up on our export settings and apply transform, and then on our armature we make sure to set X and Z as our primary and secondary bone axes. So you can see why this thing can be an absolute pain in the backside. I do not blame you for struggling with this particular element. So once I would recommend that the first thing you do is just take yourself through this process, get the asset exported out, get it imported back in again as a new asset, just so that you can test it, and then you can start moving on to some other elements. Now, our character itself is built up of multiple components, and we have done that, one, so that the player can mix and match the different character elements that we have inside of our game, but also to make your life easier as character artists. If you don't necessarily have time to do a full character, you can just do a section, so you can do a custom head, a custom body, a custom lower torso, not lower torso, lower body, so legs, and also a hair element as well if you want to. So these assets have been split up, and the way that this works is that we have a single source skeleton. So this is our, in this instance I'm just using the base skeleton, but you can also just have a skeleton that's just got a triangle in it or something like that if you wanted to. And this is what drives the entire animation logic. So we have one skeleton that drives all the anim logic, and all the other assets which are visible are set to just copy that particular skeleton. The way we do this is by using an animation blueprint, which I've set up here, that just sets it to copy pose from mesh. And that's going to use the attached parent as the copy point. So what that does is it means that we have one skeleton, which is this one here, and it's hidden, actually doing all of the logic and deciding what animations to play and going through them on the entire skeleton. And then each of these just copies the pose together. And what that means is that if we go in and we just snap these all back together, that when we play, at the moment it's just set to play the run animation, but when we play it's going to always play it in sync, so all of these elements will always match up from an animation perspective. But as you can see, each of these are separated out. So if we click on them, we can split them out like so. Now, to try and make your lives a little bit easier, on top of the easyifying that I'm currently going through. I have also made some variants for each of these base elements as well. So there's one that's just a head, there's one that's just the upper body, and then there's one that's the lower body as well, to try and make your lives just a little bit easier when you're doing those. So you can use those as a base if you start editing and creating your own animations on top of. So one of the nice things about this as we go through, so let me go in. I've done a quick test just to make sure that this all does work nicely. So we've got our upper body 2 file, which I've made here. So I've gone in and I've customized this character to have a little bit of a barbarian look to it. So I've added these big chunky braces to the sides. Not mostly a character artist, so please forgive the reasonably kind of mediocre character design here, but we've got these big chunky braces in, and all I've done is I've modeled those and then I've attached them to the skeletons, to the base mesh that we have here, and then I've skinned those so that they're using the correct bone placement. And then all I need to do is export this out, again using that setting that we defined earlier. So we just select all of our assets, file, export, and then export as FBX. And then we can choose our location. Again, I'm just going to use my scale preview and make sure that that's all correct. And you can take the opportunity to pause the screen so you can see the setup that we've got there. And then when I've imported that in, it's just a simple case of going in, switching out the element that I want, and now I have my character with my braces. And the really nice thing about this is that this is just going to work with all of the different animations and the gameplay logic that we've set up. As long as you have skinned it correctly to the original skeleton, it will work. So you can see we've got a nice asset here. We might need to do a little bit of adjustment on the actual bracer position so it doesn't intersect with that arm, but otherwise, kind of we've got quite a nice customization on that particular character. Now, we can actually take this a step further. So as well as changing the original base, we can actually add to the skeleton without having to generate a completely custom skeleton. Now, hopefully you've heard of leaf bones. If you haven't, then let me take you through the wonderful world of leaf bones now. So basically, if we want to add extra bones to our character, we can do that as long as those bones aren't inserted between 2 pre-existing bones. So as an example, I have my thigh R here, which goes to thigh twist. So these 2 bone sections here, I can't add an additional bone between these 2 bones that are already existing. That's not going to work. But what I can do is I can add a bone to any additional bone that we have here. So you can see at the end of this bone hierarchy, we have this point. I can go in and I can make an additional one. So this is my ear bone. So I can go in and I can add an extra bone on top of that current asset. So we can go in and we can also do that here as well. So if I wanted to create, like, let's say an earring, I could go in and add that just like that. And then I can export this out and that's going to work just fine. It's going to add to the bone hierarchy, but those bones are only going to be used for the assets where it's actually got some skin data where that's being used. Now I've got another example. I'm doing a lot of, here's one I made earlier for this. I do apologize, but we've got lower body 2. So I've gone in and I've added a tail for our base character. So if I go in and I hide this, I've taken my my pelvis bone that you can see here, and I've gone in and added another set of bones for my tail 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I have modeled the tail mesh on top of that. This is a very janky way of doing it, but I just needed a nice quick demo. And then once I export that out, we can go back into our editor, and now I have my asset with a tail. So you can see now if I go to my bone hierarchy, you can see I have my bones added here, and you can see I have tail 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I have a stupid extra where I didn't name the 4th tailbone properly, so we can ignore that. So you can see that even though we've got, kind of this asset imported in fresh, all of these extra bones are kind of grayed out because we're not using them. And if I go back to the original skeleton, you can see that we don't have the tail on that asset. So now this has a slight downside, which is that even though we've added these extra bones, our animation isn't going to do anything special with them because it doesn't know they exist, right? So when we animated this, we didn't animate with a tail in mind. So because of that, those bones are going to be rigid. But what we can do is we can start adding some extra logic using both control rig, which is the preferred way of doing it, or we can go in and add to the anim graph. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to tell it to use anim blueprint, and I'm going to tell it to use child copy extra for this particular setup. And if we go in and press play, let's see if it's working by default. No, it's not. That's probably because I switched my asset over. So just 1 second. Let's just get rid of the physics override. So if I press play now, you can see that I now get this tail with some really over the top physics animation playing on top of it. And what's nice about this is that if I go in, let's just reset this back to the animation asset, you can see that I now get this kind of tail responding to the original animation because it's got this physics element added to it. So this is quite easy again to add. We're actually just adding this to the physics asset that we've got on this particular asset. So if I go to my character, and again, what's quite nice is we can add this to this one as well. So even though we've got child pose copy extra, I can go in, and add demo. Now you can see that I've got that tail animation playing and giving me some nice secondary animation. So the actual animation blueprint itself is very easy. We're just enabling the rigid body component on that particular tail element. So that's quite simple to set up. And then on our tail or our lower body mesh, we just need to make sure that we've got a decent physics body attached to that. So if we go into this, all I've done is I've gone in and added some bone physics and some rigid body setup. Again, you can take a look at this asset. I'll leave it in so that you can see how it's been done. But basically we have an angular motor which is constantly trying to apply a 10-degree rotational orientation to this, which gives it a little bit of flick. And then we have some strength that we're applying to that, and I kind of scale it down as we work our way down the tail. So you can see that we've got, kind of a relatively simple setup for this particular element, and that allows us to make the character almost completely unique, for how we're doing this. So even though you are working to a single base skeleton, you can do an absolute ton to augment the skeleton that is already there. So I really do strongly advise that you stick with the base character. It's going to be a much easier journey for you, and you'll get something at the end that is, much more likely to make it into the final sample game. So I would highly recommend going in, starting out by just doing a character element, even if you do want to do a full character maybe later on. One last thing to keep in mind, we haven't seen any characters for the main character be added to our Perforce project. So if you are working on a character, I highly recommend you go in and you get it added in soon. We've got a couple of creatures in, we've got one or two NPCs, I think, but we haven't seen any coming into here. So if you have a base character that you have set up, please, 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 I urge you, get this in as early as you can, even if you're going to iterate on it more. If you've got a base mesh, if you've got a lower poly sculpt that you can throw in there, do that, because it means that you can start to see those characters. We can start getting that implemented in sooner, so that you can start seeing that content. Hope this was useful. If you have any questions, please post them on the Discord.